You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 7th of July 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Briefing is brought to you in association with ADIS. Hello and a warm welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Emma Nelson, and coming up in the next 30 minutes, Donald Trump threatens another 10% tariff on any country which sides with the Brics nations. We'll ask, is he bluffing? Also ahead on today's programme.
So being right next to the forest, we also wanted to carry over the fullest sense of complexity and diversity into the space.
We're back at the World Expo in Osaka to find out how the designers of the show made use of their natural surroundings. Our Helsinki correspondent will bring me a roundup of Nordic news from the studio right here in London. And
we are born, we have kids of our own, we have friendships and relationships. I like the fact that we are all exploding together. It kind of makes me feel like I'm part of something that is happening.
An interview with the Italian singer-songwriter Giorgio Poi. All to come right here on The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. Donald Trump threw the world another trade threat this morning, side with the Brics countries and receive an extra 10% tariff. So allies of Brazil, Russia, India and China, of which there are several, will now find it hard to distance themselves given just how complex and intertwined global trade is. Well, Chris Chermak is Monocle's senior news editor and he joins me in the studio now. Good afternoon, Chris.
Good afternoon. Happy trade negotiation week.
Here we are again. I mean, we're counting down to the 60-day deadline in a couple of days. But first, this new salvo from Donald Trump this morning. Do we actually know how you define an ally of the Brics nations? Because it pretty much covers most of the world.
It does. It covers more than half of the world's population and about 40% of its economy if you just take the membership of the Brics, which has expanded in the last year or so quite a lot. So you have now Egypt, Ethiopia, Indonesia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. So it is a pretty big bloc at this point. And as is perhaps typical at this point when we look at something that Donald Trump says here, we also don't know necessarily from this Truth Social that he tweeted out. I don't even know what truthed out on this. He just
I think
said
the
that
verb is the least of our worries on this one, to be honest.
Any country aligning themselves with the anti-American policies of the Brics will be charged this 10% tariff. So is he trying to split the Brics up in some way? Is he hoping that maybe the new members don't go along? We also don't know exactly what the policies are. There weren't really any specific policies that were announced this weekend under the Brics. All they said, and particularly President Lula of Brazil was quite strong on this, saying that the Brics are now sort of the bloc, if you will, that is standing up for global trade and that they have to resist the tariffs of Donald Trump. So that was the statement that came out from the Brics, if you will, simply saying they want to be pro-global trade. They want to continue to push for a world that is in line with the WTO, et cetera, et cetera.
It's an interesting thing that he's actually made the distinction of anybody who aligns their policies with the Brics, given the fact that actually if he was trying to push away anybody who did any trade with the Brics, you would actually find yourself, well, you'd have everybody, wouldn't you? Because given the fact that most people buy something from China at some point, Russia has its own allies who it still does deals with. Brazil still trading hard. India, massive amounts of trade as well. Not to mention all the extra countries who've driven on as well. So one wonders what Donald Trump is actually trying to achieve by this.
Well, and in addition to that is the fact that it is this week of negotiations because we have the 90-day deadline for Trump to reach deals with these countries. So all of these countries that he is now suggesting might get an additional 10% tariff are in current negotiations with the United States over what kind of level they're going to get. So perhaps in some ways this is a bit of just muddying the waters, if you will, at this point, because nobody knows what kind of tariff they're going to get. So maybe he reaches a deal with one and says, well, I've added 10% because of your BRIC stance. Maybe not. We don't know exactly what the deals are going to be. India is a good example of that, one that really hopes to get some sort of trade deal. Are they now wondering whether whatever deal they reach is sort of that deal plus 10%?
I mean, Narendra Modi must really be smarting today over this, given the fact that Modi and Trump ostensibly get on. They have met each other several times. They place themselves as in sort of quite a buddy-buddy situation. To find yourself actually being lumped in with the rest must be very difficult for India today.
I think that's what's also interesting in general about this, because if you take the BRICS, it is such a broad group at this point that we don't really know where they stand. President Lula, who is sort of leading this meeting because it is in Brazil, he is trying to set the BRICS up as this essentially force for good, representing the global south, but also being particularly sort of pro-foreign aid. He sort of took Western nations to task for the fact that they don't support foreign aid anymore and are going for military spending, with NATO boosting its budgets instead. Things like that. But then at the same time, you have countries like China and Russia that are part of it, even though they're not in attendance at this particular summit. So it's very interesting, as you say, when Trump takes on a group like this, who exactly is he taking on? Is he really taking on an India and a Narendra Modi who he gets along with? Was he taking on particularly Brazil because of Lula's comments this weekend, and was that his target? He also gets along quite well with the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Is he targeting them now in addition to this as well? So it's such a big group. Indonesia, another one we could talk about. So there are so many, and all of them are in these negotiations right now.
And not to forget Spain, who at one point Donald Trump mistakenly had as part of the BRICS as well. So I wonder how tense they're feeling in how sort of tight their collars are feeling in Madrid this morning.
Which does bring us to the European Union,
well,
for
yes.
that matter, also in trade negotiations currently with the US and hoping for a deal by Wednesday. Wednesday
is the deal, isn't it? There is still no deal between the EU and the US. The EU moves slightly slower than Donald Trump. It has the reputation for being the ultimately skilled bloc at compromise. This is probably two things that Donald Trump might not find so workable.
Well, he doesn't look into the details quite as much. That is certainly fair. But at the same time, what's also interesting and somewhat bizarre about all of this is the fact that, yes, the EU is the one that wants to have protracted negotiations. But of course, Donald Trump has also at the moment been protracting these negotiations, because even at this point, initially there was an assumption, 90-day deadline, tariffs come back into effect. Now it is letters sent out at the 90-day deadline. The tariffs come into effect on the 1st of August. And U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has suggested, well, actually, basically, we can negotiate until the 1st of August. So the European Union is trying to reach a framework deal by Wednesday, which would be basically just a few pages of notes on what they would like to do, and then they'll negotiate the proper details in the next few weeks. That would be the hope from Brussels.
A brief question on this one. The phrase taco has been doing the rounds for a couple of months. Trump's always chickens out. How seriously do we take Trump's threat about BRICS?
It is very hard at this point to take any of his threats extremely seriously. If you look at the markets, there was not a very big reaction today. A little bit of a muted reaction. Stock futures are down somewhat in early trading. But at this point, investors have been taking all of this with a grain of salt. I think there's an expectation at this point that some tariffs will come into effect, so it's not the full taco anymore, if you will. Everyone recognizes that he is going to have to introduce tariffs. Basically, even the European Union is accepting there will be that 10% base rate. What happens above that, nobody really knows at this point. And yes, the taco thing comes into effect. Is he really going to go through with it? If he does, our market's going to show their power again, and then he backs down, which is essentially how this 90-day deadline started in the first place. So it's going to be very interesting to watch in the next few days and weeks how committed Donald Trump really is to major tariffs as opposed to the 10%. Will he go for the 20, 30, 40, 50% tariffs that he's threatened against the European Union, China, and the like?
While you're keeping an eye on Trump, anything else that's caught your eye today, or anything else that Chris Cermak's working on in his desk?
Working on a few different things. The shows for tomorrow, Emmanuel Macron will be here in London, so we're going to be covering that and a few separate things. I interviewed a Chinese podcaster about U.S. relations and China, so I'll be be working on getting that story out to our listeners as well in the next few days.
Better hurry back up to your desk, Chris. The agenda is full. Chris Cermak, Monocle's senior news editor, thank you so much for joining us in the studio. The time here in London is just nudging 10 minutes past midday. You're listening to The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson, coming to you live from London. Here's a summary of the day's other news headlines with Carlotta Rebello.
Thanks, Emma. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is due to meet with US President Donald Trump later today. There is speculation it may be the opportunity where there is an announcement on a ceasefire deal for Gaza. It will be Netanyahu's first visit to the White House since the two leaders collaborated in an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities last month. Police are blocking major roads leading into Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Most businesses remain closed ahead of planned anti-government protests. The demonstrations are focused on police brutality and poor governance, with a demand for President William Ruto's resignation over alleged corruption and the high cost of living. And Suzuki Motor Corporation has launched sales of its own boil-in-the-bag curry. Initially developed for Indian employees in Japan who longed for the taste of home, 4 different varieties of Indian curry are now available online. The packaging is styled by the company's vehicle designers based on its Swift hatchbacks and Jimny compact SUVs. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Emma.
Thank you, Carlotta. I'm not sure I'd quite like to eat a curry inside a Jimmy, but there we go. Let's have a look at some of the headlines that's dominating the Scandinavian, the Nordic newspapers today. I am delighted to say that Petri Burtsoff, Monocle's Helsinki correspondent, usually either in the Finnish capital or in his wonderful house in the middle of the countryside, has hopped on a Finnair flight, headed all the way down to London and is joining me now. I'm delighted to say it's lovely to see you, Petri. Welcome. You didn't just come expressly for the briefing, did you?
No, as much as I would like to say that I did, I'm actually doing other shows as well and doing some magazine work as well, and then taking in the sights of this beautiful metropolis.
Thank you. And a very warm welcome we offer to you as well. So while you're doing all that, you've been having a look at the Nordic headlines today. Where do you want to start?
Let's start with, I have a mix of sort of serious news and then sort of lighter news as well. Which one would you like to start with?
Let's start with the heavy stuff and work backwards.
All right. Okay. Well, this is something you already spoke about a little bit this morning. It's about Poland reinstating the border controls with both Germany and Lithuania. But I just wanted to talk more about the Lithuanian side because we all remember how in 2021 we had a crisis on the Lithuanian-Polish border. And Belarus border as well, with migrants sort of coming from Belarus and Poland and Lithuania, saying that it was all orchestrated. And now Poland is reintroducing border controls also on the not only on the German border but also on the Lithuanian border. Temporarily, they say for a month, but they can extend. And this, of course, I mean, we remember that Poland had an election and they elected a nationalist president. So now basically the government, the pro-EU government, is trying to co-opt this harsher immigration line to take voters from the populist right.
Now, when we mentioned this on the Globalists, as you just mentioned as well, the discussion at that point was a question over whether Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, was effectively doing this to appease the far right because he didn't know how to deal with them. With Lithuania, it's slightly different, isn't it? Because the kinds of people who are crossing the border are being, dare I say it, there are claims that they're being deliberately funneled from Russia through Belarus towards Lithuania in a sort of an attempt by Moscow to basically unsettle everything. Yeah,
and I think it's been proven that they do that. They do that same stuff on the Finnish border, and there's satellite images showing how the migrants are being put on buses by the state authorities and then driven to the border. So it is all orchestrated and part of this hybrid dare I say warfare that Russia is waging. So very different compared with the German stuff.
Okay, where do you want to go next?
Okay, let's do a lighter story. This is about the Copenhagen Metro, and that's right. They basically announced that they will not be announcing the metro stops over the loudspeaker in English anymore. So as we know, Danish is a language that is pronounced rather differently compared to how it's written. And up until now, they've pronounced the names both in how they're pronounced in Danish, but also then for the international tourist, how they would be pronounced sort of if they were read in English. So just taking one example, I mean, my Danish is quite rusty. But
we must apologise to all our Danish listeners, because neither you nor I are masters of it.
Yes, but I do speak Swedish, which is very much related to Danish. So basically, one example is this famous Copenhagen station called Fredriksberg, and the Danes would of course pronounce the word berg as in berg, but in English you would say it Fredriksberg. So now they're not saying Fredriksberg anymore; they'll just say Fredriksberg.
I mean, that's fine, but there will be moments when actually that wonderful, delicious jumble of vowels will happen somewhere, and there'll be an H and a V and an N, something somewhere along the line, which you could probably guess how to read it, but how to say it will be more problematic. I mean, what has prompted them to actually make it harder to get around as the Danish capital, other than to, I don't know, spite the English speakers? They can't be doing that. They're nice people.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking about when I read this piece of news. So why would you make it more difficult in this day and age for tourists to get to where they want to get? But basically, they justify this. They said that they did sort of a focus group survey and asked people, which pronunciation they like more, the English one or the Danish one, and most people said they like the Danish, and this group also included foreign tourists. So maybe this was about being more authentic and just saying the Danish names as opposed to thinking what's the most practical thing for tourists.
Fair enough. Okay, fine. Let us head to. There's an article in France 24 about spy churches. This is marvellous.
Yes, this is straight out of a Cold War movie when I read this piece. So basically there's a Russian Orthodox church near the airport of Västerås. That's the correct pronunciation, by the way, in Sweden. And the Swedish authorities are now saying that this airport is actually a spy center. And this wonderful story, there's a picture of the church, and it says that there's a taller than planned spire in the church. There's an elusive priest that nobody has ever seen. It's very close to the airport. Why would you have a church so close to the runway? There's a high fence around the whole premise, the whole plot. There's security cameras everywhere, and they've actually shown that the head priest of the church has very close links to the Kremlin. And this is obviously not one of the major airports in Sweden, like Gothenburg and Stockholm. But now that Sweden has joined NATO, this is one of the potential sites for sort of a NATO air base or airport that NATO Air Forces would use. So very strategic importance. But I just think it's like, can you do it in a more sort of an obvious way of having a church that nobody has access to, and this like super tall spires, and yeah.
Indeed, and such a hallowed place as well. Petri Burtsov, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. What else are you on Monocle Radio while you're here?
We're gonna talk on tomorrow's daily about some political stuff as well, and I will this is a big teaser. I'm going to talk about potatoes and Finnish potatoes as well on tomorrow's daily.
You've made me eat Finnish potatoes quite recently, and they were delicious. Petri Burtsov, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. You're with the briefing on Monocle Radio. Now, the Osaka Kansai Expo is being held in Osaka until October the 13th this year. And at the Expo, even the toilets and rest areas are made noteworthy because they're designed by young architects. Well, reporting from the Expo, Monocle's Ryuma Takahashi talked to these young designers about how to make the facilities special.
In 2025 Osaka Expo, what we should pay attention to isn't just the pavilions or the grand ring. Total 20 facilities including rest areas, toilets, galleries and satellite studios were designed by young architects, gathered through the open proposal competition. Under the venue design concept of diverse yet unified, unique and experimental facilities were constructed. Today we focus on architects who designed the toilet and rest area in the Expo. Toilet 8 was designed by 3 architects, Shingo Saito, Yuki Nemoto, and Mumu Tashiro. This toilet is designed with an exterior that looks like several white, polygonal, cylinder-like towers of different heights gathered together. Mumu Tashiro explains this toilet like this.
The Expo is a very rare opportunity for diverse individuals from all over the world to gather in the same place and use the same architecture. We wanted to propose a restroom that people with different values and cultural backgrounds can use together comfortably. Usually, in public restrooms, women's and men's restrooms are on opposite sides and with a barrier-free restroom between them. However, the point about restrooms is that we consider women, men, and all genders without any hierarchy. The restroom units, each with a slightly different plan and height, are placed randomly throughout the site. Depending on the placement, the area is gently divided into women's zones, men's zones, and all gender zones. By gathering units with different characters, like as a crowd, we wanted to create a unified landscape despite their own differences.
They say this toilet deconstructs the traditional architecture planning that was modeled after the standard human being and pursues a new modern toilet typology that is easy for everyone to use. Shingo Saito reflected on the design process as follows.
First, we started by thinking about a new typology for toilets themselves. For example, we could make them all-gender toilets. We think that's also a modern idea. But on the other hand, some people think that having their own women's toilet is a women's right. So we first thought about proper zoning and balanced placement of men's zones, women's zones, and all-gender zones. And as for the toilet's interior, we held workshops when designing the toilet. We held workshops together with people who are visually impaired, people who have hearing difficulties, wheelchair users, and others. We talked about how to make it more user-friendly through workshops and listen to each individual voice.
At the first glance, this architecture doesn't look like a toilet. But when you actually use it, it feels like a new form of toilet with a room for various people to use as they want. Rest Area 3 was designed by architect Suzuko Yamada. This is a rest area with a unique mix of trees and colorful geometric-shaped buildings. Suzuko Yamada introduces this architecture as follows.
So our rest area is located at the edge of the forest area, Shizuke-san Mori, called, in the middle of the expo. And across the whole venue were pavilions from many countries stands by side. This is actually one of the few public spaces with a roof. And since it's also close to the main entrance, a lot of people naturally pass by here. So we thought it was important to make it feels completely open and welcoming to everyone, while also offering plenty of comfortable spots where people could sit and just relax. So being right next to the forest, we also wanted to carry over the fullest sense of complexity and diversity into the space. So specifically, we divided the building into 6 smaller structures and arranged them to mix with the surrounding trees. So we imagined a space where man-made structure and plants blend together, creating small and cozy places in between.
Being located right next to the Expo's central forest, Yamada explains her thinking behind creating a building that harmonizes with its surroundings.
Even though the expo is a really special event in a unique setting, I wanted to honestly think about what architecture can actually do right now. So instead of focusing on using kind of very special materials like stones or the papers, I don't know, or special construction methods. We wanted this project to be about rethinking how architecture relates to people and places. So that's a really standard question. So we wanted the building to have a kind of, playful and slightly unbalanced look, kind of like, natural trees or maybe animals in the forest. So they could naturally create a new relationship with the plants or a structure around them. So we really had to find that kind of balance. And we kept the form as simple as possible, but we worked hard to make sure the architecture wouldn't feel closed off or too stiff.
I saw many visitors taking a break here, seeking cool shade. Her colorful architecture created a unique atmosphere where the busy energy of the Expo meet moments of calm. These facilities offer another way to experience the Expo, not just visiting the pavilions, but discovering the thoughtful spaces in between.
And that was Monocle's Ryuma Takahashi talking to designers at the Osaka Expo. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Now we hear more from an Italian singer-songwriter who's a regular on our playlist right here on Monocle Radio. I'm talking about Giorgio Poi. And Monocle Radio's Fernando Augusto Pacheco spoke with Giorgio here at Midori House. And they were talking about his sunny fourth album and what inspires his music.
The sun has been part of my life for many years, except when I was living in London. And I was, somehow I was, in those years I was missing it. I could feel this attraction towards summertime, towards sunny places, which I didn't have before I lived here, actually. And quite the opposite. I was really attracted to gloomy weather, and you always want the opposite of what you have.
I can totally relate, being from Brazil. I came with this idea, then I've changed.
Of course, yeah. You romanticize the rain, you romanticize the grayness, and it does have still, I like it. But you get tired of it as well. As much as you get tired of the sun when it's too hot, like the summertime in Italy is long and very hot. Yes. But yeah, there is for sure, I guess, a vibe, like a sunny vibe, maybe.
I love it. Let's talk about the new album. First of all, correct me if I'm saying the title wrong. Is it Shege or?
It's Skegge.
Skegge. That sounds much better. How can we translate that? Skegge.
It means shards. Mm-hmm. Basically, yes. So when there is like an explosion, there's shards everywhere. And the idea is that we live inside of an explosion. Since the Big Bang, everything started to explode, and it still is exploding. And we are in the middle of it, and things happen while we explode. We live our lives. We are born. We have kids of our own. We have friendships and relationships, and there's people we love, and many things happen. In life. But I like the idea of, I like the fact that we are all exploding together, and it kind of makes me feel like I'm part of something that is happening.
That's fantastic. I want to ask you about perhaps some specific songs as well and what they mean. One of my favorite is Nelle tue piccine.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. I think, to be honest, anything that relates to a swimming pool kind of, I don't know, it makes me feel a bit dreamy about it. So what is the song about in particular?
Well, the song actually is about the idea of swimming in a swimming pool is applied to a relationship. So like if there is a relationship that you swim in these waters that you know very well, and they might feel comfortable and have just the right temperature. But maybe at some point you realize that you need some ocean around you, and you decided to go somewhere else and face the waves.
Very interesting. So not necessarily sad, maybe just exploration.
Yes, exactly. It's about exploration. And some swimming pools can look very peaceful and calm, but actually sometimes they hide some dangerous elements.
Wow.
And so you need to get away.
That's the story of a film there as well. Do you have a favorite song from the album that you would like to talk about? I also love another one related to the sea, Delle Barche Transatlantic. That's a really, really good one as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of sea actually in
Yes.
this. There's a lot of water. You could say it's a liquid record.
Yes.
Somehow. There isn't really a song that I like more than the others. I like them all the same when I decide that, I've reached a point where I'm satisfied and I'm happy with what I've done. Then I love them all in the same way. But then I do get affected by what others like more. So sometimes, I might think, maybe there is a song that at some point I thought, I think this is the strongest, this is great. Then maybe, it gets a mild reaction from someone. And so I start thinking also, okay, maybe I didn't quite get to saying what I wanted to say. So the message didn't quite get through. But then maybe someone else tells me the opposite about that same song, and then I change my mind again, and I said, okay, then maybe there is some. So yeah, it's a difficult relationship with songs that you've written and that you've loved and hated while you were in the process of working on them. Maybe there's this one called Un aggettivo, un verbo, una parola. Which I quite like in these days. But then, maybe tomorrow there will be another one.
That's Giorgio Poi there talking to Fernando Augusto Pacheco. And you can hear the full interview on the Monocle Weekly and read more in the July-August issue of Monocle, and also listen to his music as part of our playlist. And that's all the time we have for today's edition of The Briefing. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producer Anita Riotta. Our researcher was Henry King and our studio manager was Steph Chungu. The Briefing's back at the same time tomorrow, but for now from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening and have a great week.